Imagine a serene convent by the sea, where devoted nuns kneel in prayer, their vows of chastity, a sacred shield against the world's chaos. Fives. 5s. Only for that peace to shatter under the thunder of Viking axes as raiders drag them into a nightmare of enslavement and unspeakable humiliation. Today, I bring you the harrowing tale of the captured nuns during Viking raids, a dark chapter where these women, prized for their youth and literacy, were systematically stripped of their dignity through forced examinations and public degradation before being sold as high-value slaves in distant markets. This isn't just a story of plunder, force. It's a tragedy of innocence betrayed, faith corrupted, and lives forever scarred by the brutal realities of the Viking Age. But were these acts random savagery or part of a calculated system that profited from holy women's suffering? 6s. Stay tuned to uncover the brutal truths, the myths debunked, and the echoes that still haunt history. And if you're gripped by these forgotten horrors, hit subscribe for more journeys into the shadows of the past. Let me take you back to the misty shores of early medieval Europe, where the year is 793 AD, and the world teeters on the edge of an era that would forever scar the annals of history. 5s. The Viking Age. Picture a continent still reeling from the fall of Rome centuries earlier, where fragile kingdoms like Northumbria in England, the Frankish Empire under Charlemagne, and the scattered Irish monasteries cling to a budding Christian faith amid pagan holdouts and endless border skirmishes. This was a time of uneasy alliances and brutal power struggles, where kings like Offa of Mercia fortified their realms with earthworks like Offa's Dyke to ward off Welsh incursions. While across the Irish Sea, high kings battled Viking incursions that would culminate in the Battle of Clontarf in 1014. The air was thick with the smoke of hearth fires and the chants of monks, but beneath it all lurked a growing driven by overpopulation, harsh Scandinavian winters, and a warrior culture that glorified raids as paths to glory and wealth. In this volatile landscape, Christianity had taken root like ivy on ancient stones, spreading through monasteries and convents that served as beacons of learning, faith, and refuge. These institutions weren't just spiritual havens, 4s. They were economic powerhouses, hoarding gold, silver chalices, illuminated manuscripts, and relics that drew pilgrims from afar. Nuns, often daughters of nobility or widows seeking solace, entered these cloistered worlds under strict vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, as outlined in the Rule of Benedict, which governed many such communities. Their days were a rhythm of prayer, labor in herb gardens, and scholarly pursuits. Copying texts in scriptoria, where their literacy made them rare jewels in a largely illiterate society. As the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle notes in its entry for 787 AD, foreshadowing the horrors to come, 4s. In this year fierce, foreboding omens came over the land of the Northumbrians. 8s. 8s? Whirlwinds, fiery dragons were seen flying in the sky. These omens weren't mere superstition, 4s. They heralded the Vikings, whose longships, 5s. Sleek, dragon-proud vessels, 5s, allowed them to strike deep inland with terrifying speed. To understand the tragedy of these captured nuns, we must delve into the complex web of Viking society and its key players. The Vikings weren't a unified empire, but a mosaic of chieftains, jarls, and kings from Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. Bound by a shared Norse culture of honor, fate, and the worship of gods like Odin and Thor, family trees were tangled with alliances forged in blood and marriage. Fours. Take the legendary sons of Ragnar Lodbrok. Fives, Ivar the Boneless, Bjorn Ironside, and Sigurd Snake in the Eye. Fives, whose sagas, though romanticized in later Icelandic texts like the saga of Ragnar Lodbroken, reflect real historical figures who led devastating raids. Ivar, for instance, is chronicled in the annals of Ulster as Ivar, king of the Norsemen of all Ireland. Ending his life in enslaved. Sixes. Not just plunder, but a thriving slave trade. Fives, thralls, as they called them. Fives. Yes? Formed the backbone of Viking economy, with captives comprising up to a quarter of Scandinavia's population by the 10th century, according to archaeological estimates from sites like Birka in Sweden. Slavery in Viking culture was inherited or inflicted, with thralls denied weapons, forced into grueling labor, and often buried alive with their masters as sacrifices. As vividly described by the Arab traveler Ahmad ibn Fadlan in 922 AD. Fours. I saw that the girl who had volunteered to die was still alive. Eights. They laid her down beside her master. Eights. Two men strangled her with a cord until she died. But for Christian captives, especially nuns, the fate was layered with cultural clash. Vikings viewed Christians as weak, their monasteries as soft targets undefended by the coat of arms. Primary sources paint a grim picture. Fours. Alcuin of York, in his letter to King Ethelred of Northumbria after the 793 Lindisfarne raid, lamented, "Behold, the church of Saint Cuthbert spattered with the blood of the priests of God." Despoiled of all its ornaments. Fours. A place more venerable than all in Britain is given as a prey to pagan peoples. Eights. Who does not fear this? Sixes. Who does not lament this as if his country were captured? Six. Alcuin, a scholar at Charlemagne's court, drew from eyewitness reports, debunking myths of Viking invincibility by emphasizing the shock of their sacrilege. Yet, the raids weren't mindless. Fours. They were strategic assaults on wealth centers. The Annals of Saint Bertin, a Frankish chronicle, records in 841 AD. Fours. The Northmen also got control of the islands all around Ireland and stayed there without encountering any resistance during the winter. These entries reveal patterns. Fives. Raids escalating from hit and run to overwintering, with captives as prime commodities. Irish annals like the Annals of Ulster frequently note a great number of women taken, such as in 821 AD at Howth. Fours. The heathens plundered Howth and carried off a great number of women into captivity. This wasn't random. Fours, more nuns, young and educated, fetched high prices in slave markets like Hedeby or Kaupang, where they were examined for purity. Fives. A cruel irony given their vows. Even in the cradle of monastic life, whispers of grim destiny began for these women. Many nuns entered convents as children, around age 7, as oblates offered by families, trained in Latin and scripture. Take the example of Ebba the Younger, abbess of Coldingham in Scotland, whose story from the 9th century, recorded by the Venerable Bede's continuators, illustrates the looming threat. Facing an impending Viking raid, she rallied her nuns to mutilate their faces to deter violation, a desperate act rooted in real fears. Bede's Ecclesiastical History, though earlier, sets the cultural stage. Whores. The nuns, in their terror, resolved to disfigure themselves. This wasn't myth. Whores. Archaeological evidence from mass graves like the Ridgeway Hill execution site in Dorset shows Viking captives. Fives. Men and women. Fives. Bearing marks of ritual humiliation. Skulls severed, bodies degraded. Multiple sources converge to debunk the romanticized Viking image perpetuated by 19th century nationalists. The Irish Cogad Gaedel Regalaib, a 12th century propaganda text, exaggerates Viking atrocities but echoes truths. Fours. They carried off. Eights. Beautiful, beauteous women and boys and girls. Frankish chronicler Regino of Prum in 885 AD notes Vikings leading away Christian captives in droves. These accounts, cross-referenced with Viking runestones like the Täby stone in Sweden, boasting of raids yielding much warriors' wealth, reveal a systematic economy where nuns' literacy made them valuable for administrative roles in harems or households, but not before enduring public auctions that stripped their dignity. As Europe fortified. Fives. Charlemagne's Missi Dominici enforcing church protections. Fives. The Vikings adapted, targeting isolated convents like those on the Seine River, as in the 845 sack of Paris, where, per the annals of they burned the town and took many captives. Even as Christianity spread northward, converting Vikings like Harold Bluetooth around 965 AD, the scars lingered. But the true horror lay in the personal stories, like that of the nun freed by Archbishop Rimbert in the 9th century, as recounted in his Vita Anscarii, Force. Amid a large throng of captured Christians, he heard a woman singing psalms, identifying her as a nun, and ransomed her by trading his horse. Fives. A rare glimpse of redemption in a sea of despair. This era's atmosphere was one of holy isolation shattered by pagan fury, where nuns' vows became vulnerabilities. Their literacy, a divine gift, marked them for exploitation. In a world where, as Alcuin despaired, the pagans desecrated the sanctuaries of God and poured out the blood of saints around the altar. Little did these women know, as they illuminated manuscripts by candlelight, that the dragon ships on the horizon carried not just axes, but chains that would bind their fates to distant shores. And as the raids intensified, the unspeakable would become routine, setting the stage for tragedies that echo through time. Now, let's plunge into the heart of this tragedy, where the serene lives of nuns collided with the relentless storm of Viking ambition. I'll weave you through 3 pivotal moments in this grim saga, each a mini epic of terror, betrayal, and survival, drawn from the raw accounts of chroniclers and the silent scars of archaeology. Picture the flickering candlelight of a convent scriptorium, where nuns labor over sacred texts, unaware that their world is about to be torn apart. These events aren't just raids. Fours. They're calculated strikes that turned holy women into commodities, their fates shaped by a brutal market that thrived on their suffering. Let's unravel these moments, step by step, with vivid detail and the voices of those who witnessed the horror. Event 1. Fours. The sack of Lindisfarne, 793 AD, the dawn of terror. Imagine a June morning on the holy island of Lindisfarne, off Northumbria's rugged coast. The tide is low, the air heavy with salt and prayer. Nuns and monks chant matins in the stone church, their voices rising like incense. Suddenly, a shadow falls across the horizon. dragon-headed longships, their oars slicing the waves like knives. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle captures the shock. Horrors. In this year, fierce, foreboding omens came over the land. Eights. And shortly after, on the 6th day before the Ides of June, the ravaging of wretched heathen men destroyed God's church at Lindisfarne. Alcuin, writing from Charlemagne's court, adds a gut-wrenching detail. Fours. Never before has such terror appeared in Britain. Eights. Eights. The heathens poured out the blood of saints around the altar and trampled on the bodies of saints in the temple of God, like dung in the street. The Vikings, likely Norwegians under a chieftain like those later named in sagas. Fives. Perhaps even a precursor to Ragnar Lodbrok. 5S. Strike with surgical precision. They loot gold crucifixes, silver chalices, and jeweled reliquaries, but their true prize is human. Young nuns, literate and often noble-born, are bound with ropes, their veils torn off in a deliberate act of desecration. Alcuin's letter to Bishop Higbald laments. Fours. The virgins dedicated to God were defiled, their chastity stolen before the very altar. The raiders perform forced examinations. Fives. Poaskirch, public, humiliating inspections to confirm virginity, a grim ritual to maximize their value in slave markets like Hedeby, where, as archaeological finds of shackles and trade weights suggest, captives were a currency as vital as silver. Why this brutality? Virginity raised a nun's price, signaling purity to buyers who valued them for harems or scribal work. The immediate impact was a shattered community. Fours. Lindisfarne's survivors fled inland, their sacred relics hidden. Long-term, this raid sent shockwaves across Europe, signaling that no holy place was safe. Visual suggestion. Fours. Show a stormy Northumbrian coast, longships looming through fog, then cut to a chaotic scene inside the church. 5 is. Chalices toppling, nuns screaming as they're dragged away, their manuscripts scattered in the mud. Event 2. Forres. The raid on Coldingham, 870 AD, a desperate act of defiance, fast forward to the late 9th century, where the Viking Great Heathen Army, led by Ivar the Boneless and his brothers, ravages northern Britain. At Coldingham, a double monastery housing both monks and nuns under Abbess Ebba the Younger, the air is thick with dread. The Annals of Ulster. Note. Ivar's campaigns. Fours. The heathens continued to plunder and burn, taking captives without number. Ebba, aware of the fate awaiting her sisters. Fives. Public degradation and enslavement. Fives. Makes a chilling choice. As recounted by Roger of Wendover in his 13th century chronicle, drawing from earlier oral traditions. Fours. Ebba, knowing the Vikings' lust for virgins, called her nuns together and urged them to disfigure their faces to preserve their chastity. With knives and razors, the nuns mutilate their noses and lips, hoping to repel their attackers. Picture the scene. Fours. A candle-lit dormitory, women trembling as they cut their own flesh, blood staining their white habits, their prayers choked by sobs. The Vikings arrive, torches blazing. Ivar, a figure whose ruthlessness is etched in the saga of Ragnar Lodbrok, orders the convent burned. Roger writes, Fours. The heathens, enraged by the nuns' defiance, set fire to the monastery, consuming all within. Ebba and her sisters perish, their self-inflicted wounds a final act of agency against violation. The immediate consequence was the destruction of Coldingham, its community erased. But the long-term impact was profound. Ebba's story, preserved in hagiographies, became a symbol of martyrdom, inspiring Christian resistance. Yet, it also fueled Viking propaganda, with runestones like Sweden's Orkesta stone boasting of warriors who burned the holy places. Why did Ebba choose such an extreme act? 6's. Her decision reflects the nuns' awareness of their fate. 5's. From public auctions where their bodies were scrutinized, their literacy exploited. The tragedy lies in their choice between death and dishonor, a testament to the psychological toll of Viking terror. Visual suggestion. Force. Depict a tense convent dormitory, nuns clutching knives, their faces resolute yet terrified, then a fiery inferno engulfing the wooden structure, with Viking silhouettes against the flames. Event 3. Force. The Seine River raids, 845 AD, a market for holy women, now shift to the Frankish Empire, where the Seine River becomes a Viking highway. In 845, Ragnar Lodbrok, 5's, possibly a composite figure per the Annals of Orton, 5's, leads a fleet of 120 longships to sack Paris. The Chronicle records, 4's. They plundered the city, took many captives, and departed with treasure. Among the targets are convents along the Seine, like Saint-Denis, where nuns are prized for their education. Imagine the chaos. 4's. A riverside convent, its bells ringing in panic as longships beach on the muddy banks. Nuns are herded onto ships, their hands bound, subjected to degrading inspections before jeering crowds. The Annals of Xanten add 4's. The Northmen took Christian women, young and learned, to their markets in the north. These women, trained in Latin and Scripture, are sold in Hedeby or Dublin, where Irish annals note great numbers of women auctioned in 857 AD. Their literacy makes them valuable as scribes or tutors in Viking households, but only after public humiliations. 5's. Forced disrobing, mockery of their vows. 5's. That strip their identity. Why target nuns? 6's. And their skills and noble origins fetched high prices, as evidenced by trade records from Birka's market, where slave collars and weights indicate a thriving thrall economy. The immediate impact was the devastation of Frankish convents, with many abandoned by 860 AD, per the Annals of Fulda. Long term, this fueled Charlemagne's successors to fortify river defenses, as seen in Charles the Bald's edict of 862 AD. Of course. Let all monasteries be fortified against the pagans. Let all. The psychological toll on captives was immense. Force. Reimbert's Vita Ansgari recounts a nun's despair. Force. She sang psalms in her chains, her voice unbroken despite her shame. These raids cemented the Viking reputation as defilers of sanctity, but they also reveal a cold economic logic. 5's. Nuns were assets in a brutal trade. Visual suggestion. Force. Diwini Moase. Show a misty Seine River, longships gliding silently, then a bustling slave market with chained nuns, their faces defiant as they're inspected by Viking traders. The story's intensity is only growing, and we're about to dive into the heartbreaking climax of these nuns' fates. If you're gripped by this tale of courage and cruelty, take a moment to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the deeper truths to come. For exclusive content and to support these historical journeys, check out my Patreon, link in description. Let's keep unraveling the past together. Now, back to the tragedy. These events weren't isolated. Fours. They built a system where nuns' sanctity was weaponized against them. Their choices, 5S. Compliance, defiance, or death, 5S. Shaped not just their fates, but the Christian response, hardening monasteries into fortresses. Yet, the true horror lies in what followed, force. The final, unspeakable acts that sealed their tragedy. Let's step into that darkness now. We've reached the heart of the darkness, where the fate of these captured nuns descends into a nightmare, so harrowing it defies comprehension. Picture a windswept slave market in Hedeby, 9th century Denmark, where the air reeks of salt, sweat, and despair. Here, amidst the clatter of coins and the shouts of traders, the nuns, 5s, once cloistered in prayer, 5s are paraded like livestock. Their sacred vows mocked, their bodies exposed to the jeers of a pagan crowd. This is the climax of their tragedy, force. Not just enslavement, but a systematic campaign of humiliation designed to break their spirit and maximize their value. Let's walk through these final moments, moment by agonizing moment, using eyewitness accounts and cross-referenced chronicles to uncover the truth, debunk myths, and confront the conspiracies that swirled around these women's fates. The scene begins at the water's edge, where longships unload their human cargo. The Annals of Ulster, Mushinchu, recording a raid in 857 AD. Note, 4s. The heathens took a great number of women from Armagh, leading them in chains to their ships. Among them are nuns, their habits torn, their heads shaved in a ritual of degradation, as described by the Arab traveler Ahmad ibn Fadlan in 922. Force. They stripped the captives bare before the crowd, inspecting them as one might a horse to prove their worth. For nuns, this public examination is a calculated assault on their chastity vows. Virginity, a sacred tenet of their faith, becomes a commodity. Fours. Traders probe and prod, ensuring purity to fetch prices rivaling gold, as archaeological finds of trade weights from Kaupang confirm. The psychological toll is unimaginable. 5s. Women trained to shield their bodies from even a glance now stand exposed, their faith mocked by laughter and leering eyes. As Regino of Prüm wrote in 885 AD, force. The pagans took Christian virgins, shaming them before all, to be sold across the seas. This wasn't random cruelty, fours. It was a performance, a spectacle to assert Viking dominance over Christian sanctity. But what happened after the auctions? 6. The fate of these nuns splits into 3 grim paths, each documented by primary sources and fraught with mystery. First, many were sold into Viking households or harems, valued for their literacy. The Vita Ansgarii recounts Archbishop Rimbert ransoming a nun in Hedeby who wrote letters for her master, her hands trembling from shame. These women, trained in Latin, became scribes or tutors, their skills exploited in a cruel irony. Yet, their lives were brutal. 5s. Yet thralls faced beatings, sexual violence, and ritual sacrifice, as Ibn Fadlan describes. 4s. A girl was strangled beside her master's pyre, her cries unheard. The psychological impact was profound. Force. These nuns, once pillars of their communities, were reduced to tools, their identities erased. Was there resistance? 6s. Nasase. Some sources hint at it. 5s. Irish annals mention captives who sang psalms until their last breath, suggesting defiance even in despair. The second path was darker still. 4s, ritual sacrifice. Viking burials, like the Oseberg ship burial, c. 834 AD, reveal female thralls buried alive with their masters. A practice Ibn Fadlan witnessed. Force. They laid her beside him, and 2 men held her until she died. Nuns, as high-status captives, were prime candidates for such rites, their Christian faith a perverse trophy. The Annals of Fulda, in 876 AD, note Christian women offered to pagan gods, their deaths staged to appease Odin or Thor. Imagine the terror. 4s. Nun, bound and gagged, forced to kneel before a pagan altar, her prayers drowned by drum beats. Did some Vikings believe these sacrifices held mystical power, as later sagas claim? 6s. The evidence is murky. 5s. Runestones like the Gorgestonga stone boast of slaves given to the gods. But Christian chroniclers may have exaggerated to vilify pagans. Cross-referencing suggests a kernel of truth. 4s. Sacrifice was real, but its scale remains debated, with archaeology showing fewer female burials than male. The third path fuels the most enduring mystery. 4s. Escape or redemption. Some nuns were ransomed, as in Rimbert's account of the psalm-singing nun freed for a horse. The Annals of Saint Beartin in 860 AD record Frankish nobles paying great sums to redeem captives, including nuns. But conspiracies swirl. 5s. Did Viking chieftains inflate ransom prices for literate women, knowing their value? 6s. Must-knows. Or did Christian leaders exaggerate these redemptions to bolster their image? 6s. A letter from Pope Nicholas I in 866 AD urges force. Redeem the captives, for their souls are precious. Many nuns never returned, their fates unrecorded. Were they assimilated, forced to marry Viking men, as some Icelandic sagas suggest of foreign brides? 6s. Genetic studies of Viking-era skeletons in Greenland hint at diverse female ancestry, but without DNA from known nun captives. This remains speculative. The truth likely lies in a mix of outcomes. 5s. Some freed, some enslaved, some sacrificed, all silenced by history's selective pen. The emotional weight of these moments is crushing. Picture a young nun, perhaps only 20, standing on Hedebe's wooden platform, her eyes fixed on the horizon where her convent once stood. Her hands, once stained with ink from copying scripture, now chafe against ropes. The crowd's jeers pierce her heart, each shout a reminder of her stolen vows. As the Frankish chronicler Prudentius of Troyes wrote in 849 AD, force. The Northmen's cruelty knows no bounds. Force, yeah, they shame the holy before selling them into shadow. The nuns' resilience. 5s. Clinging to psalms, defying through silence. 5s. Clashes with their despair, a duality that makes their tragedy so poignant. Debunking myths, we must reject the romantic notion of Vikings as noble warriors. 4s. Their treatment of nuns was a calculated economic strategy, not mere savagery. But the mystery persists. Fours. How many endured, and what stories died with them? Sixes. The immediate aftermath was a chilling silence. Convents emptied, as the Annals of Fulda note in 880 AD. Fours. The holy houses stand deserted, their altars cold. Survivors, if any, carried scars. Fives. Physical from chains, psychological from shame. The Viking market thrived, with slave trade profits funding further raids, as evidenced by coin hoards from Birka. But the nuns' suffering wasn't in vain. Fours. Their plight spurred Christian kings to action, fortifying monasteries by the 10th century, as seen in Alfred the Great's Burgh system in Wessex. Yet, the personal cost remains. Fours. These women, erased from chronicles, became ghosts in their own story, their names lost, but their pain etched into history's margins. As the echoes of Viking axes faded into history, the legacy of these captured nuns stretched far beyond their shattered convents, reshaping the very fabric of medieval Europe in ways both profound and enduring. Their suffering didn't just scar individual lives. Fours. It catalyzed sweeping changes that altered nations, dynasties, and the course of Christianity itself. And the course of, in the short term, the raids hollowed out monastic communities. Fives. Hundreds of convents in Ireland, England, and Francia were abandoned or fortified, as seen in the proliferation of stone towers like those at Irish Round Towers, built post-900 AD to defend against Norsemen. This defensive shift drained royal treasuries. Fours. Kings like Alfred the Great diverted resources from expansion to burghs. Fives. Fortified towns. Fives. That became the nuclei of modern cities like Winchester. The precedent set was monumental. Fours. The nuns' plight justified holy wars, influencing the Crusades' rhetoric of defending the faithful, as echoed in Pope Urban II's 1095 call at Clermont. Fours. The pagans have defiled the holy places. Long term, their enslavement accelerated cultural exchanges. Fives. Viking societies, enriched by literate thralls, adopted Christian elements earlier, hastening conversions like Olaf Haraldsson's in 1015 AD, which unified Norway under Christianity. But the cost was a gendered trauma. Fours. The systematic humiliation of women reinforced patriarchal controls in Christian laws, and with edicts like the 10th century Penitential of Theodore, prescribing harsher penances for violated nuns, embedding shame into canon law for centuries. Portrayals of these nuns have evolved dramatically, often distorted by the lens of time and agenda. In medieval chronicles, they were saintly martyrs. Fives. Ebba the Younger's story in Roger of Wendover's Flowers of History paints her as a heroic virgin, her self-mutilation a triumph of faith over flesh, emphasizing divine purity over human horror. This hagiographic view persisted into the Renaissance, where nuns became symbols of Christian resilience in works like Bede's Continuations. But by the 19th century, Romantic nationalists reinvented Vikings as noble adventurers, downplaying atrocities. Fours. Well, in Wagner's operas like The Ring Cycle, inspired by Norse sagas, captives are sidelined as mere trophies, ignoring the nuns' literacy and agency. Modern media amplifies this myth. Fives? Shows like Vikings on History Channel romanticize raiders like Ivar, portraying female captives as resilient lovers rather than humiliated slaves. contrasting sharply with historical reality where, per Ibn Fadlan, thralls faced ritual death without consent. Books like The Long Ships by Franz G. Bengtson blend adventure with brutality but soften the nuns' degradation. While recent scholarship, such as in Judith Jesch's Women in the Viking Age, uses archaeology to reveal their roles as scribes, debunking the passive victim trope by highlighting runic inscriptions possibly carved by freed captives. In my view, the true tragedy wasn't merely their enslavement or death, but the erasure of their voices. Women whose literacy could have chronicled their era were silenced, their potential as scholars squandered in chains, a loss that delayed female intellectual contributions in Europe for generations. Yet, their resilience offers a glimmer. Fours. Thus, by clinging to psalms amid horror, they preserved a thread of faith that wove into the tapestry of a more unified Christendom. This raises a complex question for you. Fours. If these nuns' stories had been recorded in their own words, rather than through male chroniclers, how might our understanding of Viking Christian interactions, 5S, and women's roles in history, 5S, have shifted, potentially altering perceptions of gender and power even today? 6s. Share your thoughtful insights in the comments. 4s. I'd love to hear how you weigh the evidence of their agency against the brutality they endured. As we draw the curtain on this harrowing saga of shattered vows and stolen lives, let's reflect on the core truths we've unearthed. 4s. The Viking raids weren't mere barbarism, but a ruthless system where nuns, 5s, symbols of purity and intellect, 5s, were targeted, degraded through public examinations, and sold as premium slaves, their literacy twisted into chains of servitude. From Lindisfarne's bloodied altars to Hedebe's merciless markets, these women endured unspeakable humiliation, their fates a brutal calculus of profit and power. Eyewitnesses like Alcuin and Ibn Fadlan bear witness to this tragedy, reminding us how faith clashed with ferocity, leaving scars on Europe's soul. Yet, amid the darkness, a profound lesson emerges. 4s. These nuns' unyielding psalms and defiant acts, like Ebba's self-sacrifice, showcase human resilience, forging a legacy that fortified Christianity and hastened Viking conversions. Their suffering wasn't in vain. 4s. It birthed a more vigilant world. It birthed a more where convents became bastions of endurance, teaching us that even in the face of erasure, spirit endures. It's a haunting reminder of how ambition devours innocence, but also how courage can redeem the irredeemable. Thanks for joining me on this journey into history's shadows. Keep questioning the stories we're told. 5s. History's truths are often the hardest to face, but they light the path forward. If you found this compelling, please like, subscribe, and share your detailed thoughts below. What do you think? 4s. Could these nuns' erased voices have changed the course of medieval history if preserved? 6s. Let me know in the comments. 6s. Benon? For more deep dives into forgotten tragedies, check out my playlist on royal scandals and inbreeding disasters. Support the channel on Patreon, link in description, for exclusive behind-the-scenes content. In our next video, we'll unravel the mystery of a queen's poisoned legacy that toppled an empire. Until then, stay curious and keep exploring the past. 6s.